The exotic sounds of Martin Denny, the 1958 album Hypnotique, that was an American in Bali. Our guest, Mark Beshara, is on the line with us, and let's talk vampires, the vampires of Borneo.
Well, my wife and I lived in Borneo for 6 years. The Indonesian government sent me to Borneo to do some work for them, some research and surveying. And while we were there, again, rumors. And we tracked them down, and here is what we learned and what we verified and what's well documented in my book, Scared to Death. We documented that there's a maternity hospital in the capital city of South Borneo. At the maternity hospital, there were female nurses who all migrated from another part of Borneo, from a smaller city in central Borneo. They were female nurses. They came to work in the maternity hospital, and suddenly the director of the hospital and the head of nursing notice that there's a very unusually high incidence of newly birthed mothers dying. Mm-hmm. And when autopsies were performed, it was discovered that they were dying from a loss of blood. Very unusual. And what made it even more bizarre, they had all given birth to female babies, and the female babies all went missing. The head doctor called the police and the military, and investigations yielded nothing. And so what the doctor and did, he checked the work schedules. He found out that one or two nurses were the nurses who were always on duty at the time just immediately preceding the death of the newly birthed mother. The doctor and the head nurse hid in a closet. They punched a little peek hole through the closet door of a newly birthed mother's room who had given birth to a female, and there they waited. And sure enough, a nurse came in, killed, strangled, smothered the mother, and made an opening from a vein, drank blood, and took the baby, the female baby, and then disappeared. What was happening, Ghosty, is that these young female babies were taken back to the village that the nurse came from in another region, and they were being raised as the next generation of these females that I can only characterize as vampires.
Sure.
It's an inheritance from their mothers. It's handed down from mother to daughter, and it is a horrible thing to witness. In fact, we finally isolated one. A friend of ours was dating a young lady that was from that region and behaving strangely, and we finally, this expatriate community of British and Danish and Dutch and Australian that we had a social circle with when we lived in South Borneo, we confronted her as a group, and sure enough, she broke down and she admitted some of the horrible things she did. It's inheritance from her mother, and that her mother had to pass it along to her so her mother could die. Until you pass it along, you're cursed to live forever like this, according to what they believe. And from what we've seen, I can't deny that it's so.
Couple of stories from your book, True Tales of the World's Scariest Places here. Parents from hell who sold their 8-year-old son to the devil.
I'll tell you, what happens to some children in Indonesia is amazing. Yeah, they were, these people were, it's a sad story. The people were dirt poor, the parents, they had a boy, they wanted to be rich, they learned a ceremony and some rituals from a witch doctor. They performed it, and what it did, it pledged the soul of their young son to Satan. And they made that pledge. They became rich. The son, had a troubled life his whole life. They became very rich, but you know what happened in the end? It crashed in on him. The son became a decent person. I guess he had an innate spirituality. He became poor, nothing but a troubled, wretched life, but basically a decent person inside. Now, the parents, they had wealth. They were the envy of everybody who knew them and all their relatives, and it imploded. Now, they finally managed to salvage enough money to own a small, rundown house in a poor part of Jakarta, Indonesia, and they rent the rooms. They have to rent the rooms to strangers in their house to put food on their table.
That's a happy ending. Yeah, that's a happy ending to that story.
Yeah, I think the irony is wonderful.
All right, Mark, let's do it. This is the most horrifying story in the Bali Trilogy. Let's go.
It was probably... It is a sight that my wife and I have seared into our memories. Something we saw that we will never, ever forget. And not only did we see it, but some 300 or 400 other people saw it with us. Let me give you just a bit of the background. For many years, and I mean for many years, for 50 years or so, or 30 years or so, there have been countless sightings of what people always describe as a beautiful lady. She's been sighted usually out of town. Now, within the last 20 years, taxi drivers, as they're coming from the airport on the main road, with the airport's like 20 miles out of town, when they traverse from between the airport and town, they always, or not always, but many of them say, there's a pretty lady, and they pick her up to give her a ride. She wants to go to a certain intersection. She gets out of the cab. She walks into a tree and disappears inside the tree. Now, we interviewed must be 18 to 20 cab drivers who swear on their lives this happened to them. And you can tell by the look in their eyes, they are not lying. Stories are all consistent. So we checked that area, and it turns out that on that area was a cemetery. And the developers wanted to use that area to build a shopping center with a hotel, one complex, huge, very expensive. The local elders they pleaded with them. They said, don't build on the cemetery. Leave these souls in peace. The developers are the same all over the world. They wanted the money, they built the complex, and then comes grand opening day. My wife and I are there, our friends are there. There's 300 or so people there gathered in this marble-floored atrium of this 4-story, beautiful, modern shopping center. And the mayor is there, the governor is there, there's a band playing. It's a grand opening, man! And we're standing, and all of a sudden there's a voice of a young boy, and he says, Mama, Mama, look at me, Mama. And we look up, and it's a boy probably 8 years old or so, and he's on the ledge, 4 stories up, perched, and we're in the atrium in a marble floor, and he looks up and he points straight up, and there's nothing there, and he says, Mommy, look at the pretty lady. She says I can fly. And he did a swan dive. Well, the crowd, the 300 of us, we parted like the Red Sea. And he landed head first on the marble floor. His head just broke open like an overripe melon, splashed all over us, and it was horrifying. 3 months later, that whole complex, for no good reason, started to sink into the ground. By the time my wife and I returned to the States shortly after this incident, it had already sunk at over 3 feet into the ground, and the government and the developers had every architect from every country you can think of, engineers and architects. There was no reason for it to sink into the ground. It was architecturally sound. What was happening, according to the elders, was that the souls in that cemetery had no rest and were pulling the complex down into the cemetery so it would be finished and they could finally find their peace.
Wow. In listening to you tell these stories, I feel like you're single-handedly destroying whatever tourism business.
Yeah, and you want to hear the irony of it all? I was a tourism consultant for Indonesia, and I still am.
Oh.
I consult with the Minister of Tourism. Right after 9/11, I met with the President of Indonesia. So, but you see, I got to tell you, I lived in Jamaica for 2 years, and bizarre things went on there as well.
Yeah.
There is no country in the world, not even this country, that does not have its share of magic and supernatural things. One only has to go to Louisiana to find voodoo, and it was brought in from the Caribbean. It's practiced openly. Louisiana is a hotbed of voodoo. So, you know, by saying that, am I destroying tourism to Louisiana? Are people going to stop going to New Orleans? I don't think so.
No, of course not.
Yeah. But listen, you know my perspective, I think it makes a place a lot more interesting.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Suddenly I became fascinated with it after
Absolutely.
Reading the things you read.
And so people will want to read about it, know about it, find out about it, and the armchair travelers will read my books. They'll go to my site. They'll download my e-books. And the more adventurous will head for the airport and go there. So it's a big world, a lot of stuff going on, and we've experienced a lot. And I don't believe everything I hear, and so everything that's in my books, we went around and we verified it. It kind of got a little risky, I guess. I mean, in retrospect, we took some real risks, but it was an amazing adventure at the time we were doing it. We never even thought about the risks.
The Bali Trilogy, how would somebody listening tonight go about getting that?
Well, you can get them from my website, which is freetravelbooks.com, or you can go to Amazon.com and enter keyword Bali Trilogy, and there you go.